the past few years, I've gotten more and more into buying vintage clothing instead of new. If it's something you've never really thought or cared about, then keep on watching, because I'm going to discuss a few points that I think could change your mind on the matter. So as I'm discussing these points, I'll just show a constant reel of some of the items I've picked up over the years. So my first big point, and something I advocate all the time, is high quality clothing. You often hear the phrase, things aren't made like they used to be. You've probably heard it from your parents or grandparents. And this is true especially in clothing. Nowadays a lot of clothing is just mass produced and it's made to be sold at the biggest profit margin possible. Therefore there's an inevitable drop in quality. If you look back at the clothes that were manufactured in the 90s and before, a lot of the emphasis was on quality. They were making things that were built to last, and this actually extends to a lot of other items like cars and household appliances. So one thing you can rely on when you're buying vintage clothing is that it's probably going to be really high quality. Much higher quality than a lot of the clothing you can buy these days. Now I just want to be clear that this isn't true for all clothing these days. There's a lot of brands out there that take a lot of care with their quality and it shows. One of my main interests with vintage clothing is sourcing items that were made in the UK or USA. It's hard to explain until you've got them in hand, but sometimes the difference between an old and a new garment is staggering. The quality and construction of some of these older pieces is just nothing like you can buy today, and actually it shows because these pieces have lasted so long. The second thing you might find with vintage clothing is that it's really cheap. A lot of people don't know the value of the pieces they have and they just want to get rid of it. So this means there's a lot of bargains to be had. Very often you'll find on eBay or Depop someone's mum just selling a bunch of vintage shirts which are actually really high quality pieces. And it's no secret that charity shops are a goldmine for pieces like this. One of my more recent bargains is a shot New York leather jacket that I got. These can retail for £900 or more online, and I managed to get one for £50 on eBay. It's true that the condition isn't perfect, but with leather items you actually want to have a bit of a patina and you want it to be a bit worn in. Sometimes things just don't look as good when they're brand new, so this is a great excuse to buy vintage clothing. Okay, the third advantage of buying vintage clothing is how unique the pieces are. One of the downfalls of buying the newest clothing available is that a lot of other people are buying it at the same time. Therefore, everyone starts looking a little bit the same. It's very rare that you'll find two vintage pieces that are the same. So one thing you can be sure about when you're buying your vintage clothing is that you're going to look unique. And of course, that's one of the great things about fashion, is standing out and showing your personality through clothing. Point number 4 about vintage clothing is that it's always on trend. What I mean by this is that almost everything that is trendy now and going to be trending in the future has been on trend in the past. This means that there's tons of vintage clothing in the style you're looking for already available, and it's going to be more unique, higher quality, and probably cheaper than buying new. One perfect example is oversized boxy clothing, which is really popular at the moment. This trend already happened in the 90s, so you're going to find loads of 90s clothing that is in the exact style that you want. Another perfect example are denim jackets. The regular denim jacket has basically stayed the same since it was first made. So before you go out and buy a brand new denim jacket, why not have a look at what vintage ones are available? You might end up with a vintage Levi's made in USA one that has already been broken in and is half the price of new. And my fifth and final point about buying vintage clothing, and possibly the most important, is how much friendlier it is to the environment. I think it's a topic that isn't discussed enough in the fashion industry, and that's totally understandable because a lot of brands are making new clothes and that's just the way it is. I'm definitely not saying you shouldn't buy new clothes, because I buy new clothes all the time. If we take the denim jacket example again, if you went out and bought a vintage one, that means a new one didn't have to be made for you. It's just a fact that if you buy a vintage piece instead of a new one, that means one less new garment had to be produced. Again, this isn't an attack on people who buy new clothing. I buy new clothing all the time. But it might just be a good consideration if you find two pieces which are almost identical and one of them's vintage. It could help the environment. Plus, you'll probably be getting it at a cheaper price and it'll be higher quality and more unique. And so those are my points for why I think you should incorporate vintage clothing into your wardrobe. Is this something you already do, or did I just change your mind? Let me know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.